the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Today on the program, we'll plumb the depths of the short, simple phrase, "It is finished," with our spiritual director for the hour, Father Michael Hurley. Father Michael is a Dominican priest of the Western Province, the province of the Most Holy Name of Jesus, where he currently serves as the pastor of St. Dominic Parish in the Archdiocese of San Francisco. So all of this that we've talked about, from Passover to the temple to the new temple to the new Passover to the new Exodus and all of this, it doesn't just end with Jesus' resurrection, but it continues on. Can you reflect on that a little bit for us, Father?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just even starting with that sense of the wounds of Christ, as you mentioned, that they aren't simply something to be overcome, but they are now signs of glory, of splendor, of his conquering of death. I think. Right. And this is for another show, but I remember the first time, it was a couple of years ago, I just was reading a footnote about the Transfiguration in St. Thomas's Summa, and he makes this really cool distinction I'd never thought about. He says of all the, if you will, resurrected aspects of Christ, being able to walk through walls, being able to, his body won't decay, it's incorrupt, it can be wherever it wants to be. So there's all these wonderful things we have to look forward to with a resurrected body.
Yeah,
he
right.
says all of them pertain to his nature, that is the nature of divinity with humanity, but only one is connected to his personhood, that is the Son, and will be connected to each of us as persons, and that is the splendor, that is the glory of radiance that we'll have in our body. And what will be the signs of splendor? They will be the signs of our wounds, that is the wounds that we lift up to the Lord, the aspect to which we have suffered, the aspect to which we have allowed ourselves to not let the sufferings of our life turn us inward, but in which we offer them to the Lord, and in union with Christ, we allow the Lord to transform. So it's our wounds that will shine forth with the splendor that will redound to who we are, that particular name that we have. And so, in other words, what Christ did 2,000 years ago, he continues to do through each one of us. And the fact that he doesn't, in a sense, his wounds don't heal, but they're transformed into marks of love and splendor, give us, who are still in this vale of tears, as we say in the Hail, Holy Queen, the capacity to receive his love and to walk with him through our sufferings, through our own crosses, so that his work is achieved in us. And this is, I think, hinted at for someone with a good eye when we're talking about "it is finished." Unfortunately, the translation just says, when Jesus has taken the wine, he said. Well, the actual text, the word that he said, the word for "said" there is not just like he had just kind of chit-chatted or something. It's actually he cried out. It's an exclamation. It's this loud voice, which if you read, and I do certainly will recommend The Doctor at Calvary, if you know that book. But he says, this doctor who examines Christ on the cross, says, in order for Christ to speak at all, it's just excruciating. And to be able to cry out as your last words is almost inhuman. In other words, it beggars everything. And he ultimately says Jesus dies from the shock of basically uttering this last word, which I think is quite compelling. In other words, he literally shouts, and the shock, the trauma of his body through the blood loss and the passion and everything else, his heart basically just gives out. His total cardiovascular collapse as he says it is finished, and then he bows his head, he dies. And what does he do? He hands over his spirit. Here you have for John not only the death of Christ, but you have, if you will, Pentecost in a kind of preview, handing over his spirit. And what Jesus has done, fulfilled, now continues on through his spirit. In other words, the spirit continues the work, such that John says in his letter, he's got 3 little Catholic letters before Revelation, and he says there are 3 who testify: the water, the blood, and the spirit. And right after this, what happens in verse 31? He's pierced, and what flows out? Water and blood. Oh. As he hands out his spirit. So the church has always said, how does the Spirit continue? Through the waters of baptism. How does the Spirit continue? Through the blood of the Eucharist. In other words, the cross is there. It's consummated. It's done, but it continues in and with and through his Spirit in our lives, so that all of our suffering, sorrows, our way of the cross might be transformed into wounds, not of suffering and defeat, but we might say like Christ when we come to the end of our days on earth, it is finished. Christ's work is complete, is consummated in us, that we might share in the splendor of personal glory with him.
That was the Best of the Week on Relevant Radio. The best way to listen to the Best of the Week is on the Relevant Radio app, free and always free. Download and share the #1 free Catholic app today in the App Store.